Hello, Assalamualaikum. Hi everyone. So, Alhamdulillah, mudah-mudahan semua dalam keadaan baik-baik sahaja. So, we will continue on the previous part. I think that the previous part we are talking about preparing tests and examinations. And while preparing tests and examinations, there are lots of things to be involved. So, one of it is a table of specifications. So, what means by table of specification? So if you can see here, the table of specification is something that we known as a test specification or test blueprint to make sure that we will design the structure of the test before we develop the questions. So that's the reason why we name it as a framework of constructing item or questions. Because of why? Because of we want to validate the assessment through the content, through the time spent, and how many question and mark should be allocated for every single testing that proposed by the teachers or the lecturers. And for your information, what means and what are the what we call the item need to be considered when we try to develop a test specifications. So one of it is we are looking on the guideline or the procedures. There are maybe some of the schools or higher learning provider provide a guideline or procedures to set the test specification according to the requirement of the course subject or the program. And the reason why we need to have the table of specification because of we want to make sure that we are very clear about the items, what kind of item that we want to ask to to the students, the numbers of the questions, and also the time allocation is very important. So that's the reason why we need to know this before we can construct the questions. Number three, while talking about the test specification, the focus and the tensions of designing the tables of specification to look on the coverage based on the topic lectured or taught by the lecturers or the teachers. And this is where, as I mentioned on the previous video, um, we should know what kind of complexity has been embedded into this table of specification because we want to know the distribution of the taxonomy level and how can we distribute the mark to make sure that we can come up with a very complete in terms of not only covering the topic but also to provide the student with good questions with appropriate taxonomy and also with suitable marks for them. And of course, yes, these are the example, the simplest examples of a table specification. So meaning that you can see in the tables is a very simple one. And I do believe that most of the schools or even university, you have your own table of specification. But in this video, I just want to tell you the important elements of table of specification, meaning that what are the things should be included in table of specification. So if you can see here, um, in this table, you can see the topic, all right, the hours of time span, and also the mark allocation. So meaning that if we want to design the questions, we should know how much the time spent for that topics, and we want to make sure that the marks given is equivalent with the time spent. So that's the very important things that you have to bear in mind because of what the more time you spend with the student with the topic, it might be you should provide equivalent marks with the with the time allocation. So same goes within this table of specification. And then how does the topic align with the course learning outcome or the course outcome, and what are the taxonomy domain involved, and also what kind of questions and how many marks on that particular level. So this is a very important because of no, because of why? Because of we want to know the structure of the question. How many questions will ask to the students? What kind of questions? How many marks? This is very important to that we should design through table or specification. And I do believe that there are some practice they have a very complicated kind of a table or specification, but somehow this one is the very basic table or specifications to give you some kind of idea on how does table of specification works. And if you can see here, there are lots of topic. There are five topic covered with you can say you can see here they provide the total marks from the questions, and you can know how many questions that asked from that particular test. So this is very important because of somehow or other the biggest mistake on designing question when we start to design the question first without looking at the importance of table of specification. All right. So when we talk about the writing test, yes, no doubt, I think that there are lots of writing tests can be used, and one of the familiar writing tests, for example, true or false, multiple choice, MCQ, fill in the blank, matching type, short answers, short essay, short structure, long essay, long structured, and abstract long essay. So there are lots of writing tests that we can put in our question test. But however, is it that one is very suitable with the purpose of the testing, and we need to justify why we choose every each of this writing test. And for your information, um, in terms of length and time, I think that there are lots of what we call a table to explain about this, but this one just to outline is some kind of what we call appropriate times or estimation that we can allocate for a certain testing using that writing test. So if you can see here, I shared with you the best practice from the Airbury Center of the Testing Excellence and Carnegie Mellon University and Kansas Curriculum Center, David Clay. I think that this table try to explain how much time that we can spend, and we can estimately propose what is the best time for a one set of questions. So, as mentioned here, true false about 20 to 30 second, MCQ factual 40 to 60 second, one word fill 40 to 60 second, MCQ complex 70 to 90. So now MCQ they have a factual and complex, the different times, but maybe not maybe, but the complexity is different depending on the cognitive complexity. We have a matching, we have the short answer, 2 to 4 minutes, multi-choice calculation. So there are some subjects, for example, mathematics, they have the calculations, questions, word problem, short essay, drawing model labeling, and also extended long essay about somewhere on 20 to 30 seconds is depending on the purpose or the types of the writing test. And of course, yes, when we talk about the writing test, I think that a lot of us know that there are lots of options, but we need to understand what are the weaknesses and what are the strengths that we can we should know better, because of when we're designing that questions, we need to ensure that this is very suitable with the set of testing. So because of we need to choose the best one among the best to make sure that we are not wasted our item, and we are not or not we have to make sure that the most important part is the learning outcome is achieved. And normally some people like to use a true false questions because of I think that it was very simple in terms of assessing the large amounts of learning per unit. I think that this one is much easier because of you ask one question whether true or false, and you can assess the students immediately. And I think that the reason why true and false become so popular because of there are three kinds of info that we can get from the true false questions: knowledge level learning, understanding of misconception, and also when there are two logical responses, then you can know whether the student understood or not. And somehow or other, we have to admit that there are some disadvantage when we use the true and false questions. I do believe that you maybe have that kind of experience because of there are tends to be very easy, no doubt. There are maybe 50-50 chances on guessing, and in the perspective of statistics, there are tend to be a low reliability. So that's the reason why we need to be very aware when we try to choose the writing test. And the tips of constructing the true false item please to avoid double negative, long or complex sentence. I think that student easily can guess. Um, Most probably focus on the one central idea. There is no trivial, and also please make sure that somehow or other you need to be very brilliant in terms of uh, arranging your answers, and to make sure that there's no pattern that can be recognized by the students. And MCQ. All right. I think that most of the people know what is MCQ. This one is very popular item. I think that most of our testing, I think that we have an experience to develop the MCQ test, MCQ item, because all the MCQ items is consists of a problems, and normally we know as a stem, and and the solution we call as alternative, and the alternative can be the correct one, the best one, and somehow or other on the answer itself they have the incorrect or inferior alternative because of distractor. So on this juncture, you can see here is there are a lot of type on designing the multiple choice question. So meaning that whether you want to design your multiple choice question based on the question type, whether to design based on the incomplete statement types, right answer or best answer is depending on the purpose, the reason why you choose uh, that kind of options, that kind of types. But the most important part here is we need to understand the structure of the MCQ. You need to have the verbs or the question verb, as I mentioned on the previous video. You need to have the central idea. You have need to have the alternative and distractor, and please make sure the answer must be designed homogeneously. Because of why? Because of we want to avoid the heterogeneous, because of the student can guess from there. So that's the reason why on designing the multiple choice question we have to be very careful. We need to ensure the verbs, the question stem, the central idea, the alternative and distractor, and also homogeneous alternative should be in the answer. So please, as you can see here, one of the example here, which food has the lowest glycemic index, which is the verbs, glycemic index is the central idea, A, B, C is the alternative and distractor. If you can see on the answers, all the answers have the homogeneous alternative that the student cannot guess or cannot give a cue to the students on the correct answers. So this is a technically when we talk about the MCQ. How about the essay questions? I think that the essay question is something that very familiar with us, because of normally students are given a clear idea on the scopes and directions, and the student intend need to answer the questions. And normally we are testing on how the students can use their appropriate language, how the student can provide their opinions and argument, and also I think the most important part here, this is really tested student intellectual demand. So what is the advantage of these essay questions? Normally, uh, is due to the subjectivity, halo effect, a good or bad student's previous performance might be uh, give us some kind of yes effect, writing expression no doubt. So I think that somehow or other uh, the difficulty in terms of looking at the writing expression, or also handwriting, might be give some kind of effect. Same goes with the halo effect that I mentioned before. And also I think that is something that very um, make us very uncomfortable, a bit irritated, because of somehow or other we will dwell with the grammatical and also the spelling error. And of course, when this happen, is very time consuming. But however it is, this is the best writing item to measure the intellectual demand. So if you can see here, what are the common mistake that happen when we construct the questions? So number one is asking a vague questions. Asking a vague question normally is normally happen. We need to make sure that we have a clarity and focus on the questions, and please avoid the negative stems, and also please provide us a central idea. And again, refer back to your table of specification, revisit your level of cognitive and the dimension of knowledge. They will help you to design a very good questions. So what kind of questions that we can ask. Ask student a good questions. Please ask student a good question. So there are 6 types of question that we can ask. Number one, clarification. So I think that when the statements of clarification, meaning that you allow the students to justify, to discuss, and explain the point, and also provide an examples to make sure that you can get a better idea whether the students understand on the subject matter or not. Number two, challenging assumptions. We are testing their different points of view. What assumptions are you we are making, and why you are saying that? Because of somehow or other, student like to make assumptions. But how to make the assumption in the forms of academic, and you need to design the question as such. And type number three, evidence reasoning. Can you provide an example that support what you are saying? Can we validate that evidence? Do we have uh, all the information that we needed? So meaning that the student have maybe the argument, they have their own reason, but please give me the evidence, show me the evidence. Then it's proven that your assumptions or your justifications is something proven, something from what we call scholarly literature, and read thoroughly, and then you give the point. The type number four is focused on the alternative viewpoint. Somehow or others, we are welcoming point of argument, point of alternative, different alternative point, to make sure that we can have some kind of response and reacting into in the context to make the conversation more live. All right. So somehow or other is quite open in terms of getting a lot of information from the students, but the teachers or the lecturers must become the facilitators or moderators to make sure that um, you can manage and control the situations. And I think that most of the in the essay questions, we like to use the type number five. We are asking them the implication and the consequences, because of you might be design the question based on the case study or the case analysis, and you will ask the students whether what's are the effect in terms of short terms, medium, or also the long term effect, to make sure that the students can do some kind of prediction or judgment based on the data. And you can use the type number five appropriately, because of I think that this is let the student to reflect and also to respond to current situations. And type number six, we are looking at the challenging the questions. I think that this one is very high level kinds of a question that we can ask the students, meaning that you will debate through the questions, over the questions, and over the question, because of you want to find the best answers, and also to share your point of view on regards to make sure that maybe okay it could expand the students intellectual demand in the classroom. So I think that there are 6 types that's very important. Or maybe we can use the 6 types of questions to design a very good questions when we provide student with the sets of tests or examination. And of course, yes. Without further, I think that we also need to use the advantage of a stimulus, because of the stimulus is very important to make sure that it helps the student to give some kind of motivation, not only provide them with not only to serve as a guideline, but also help the student to understand better in the context of the questions. So that's the reason why if we go for the types of stimulus, there are a lot of stimulus that can be used. For example, textual, graphical, numerical, multimedia, and audio visual. And we can use the advantage of these stimulus plus with the question that we want to ask to the students. All right. So somehow or other, when we designing the questions, we need to be very ensure that yes, the complexity maybe we can see from the format and layouts. The complexity also mentions about the text and structure, the word difficulty, the levels of reasoning depending on the GSU, the discourse on the genre. How does you design the questions? What are the moods of the question, and how does the question has been uh, indirectly give a certain emotion to the students, and also how does it affect the test taker, and also are you assessing their breadth or depth of the knowledge. All right. So I think that this is one a very simple one when we talk about the table of specifications, the writing item, because of this is something that we need to look at before we design our question. So I think that that's all. Thank you so much. See you next video. Bye bye.